And pray with me if you're willing. Holy One, may the words of my lips and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, because you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. If you become the king, they will give you a hat made of precious metals and fine fabrics and encrusted with as many jewels as they can find. Throughout much of history and around most of the world, if you became a bride or a groom, then on your special day they would weave together a wreath of flowers and put it on you. If you win the beauty pageant, they will put a glittering confection of a tiara right through the lacquer of your hair. If you win the Olympics or a great battle, they might give you a chaplet of laurel leaves. If you become a saint, they will paint your picture with a halo behind your head. And all of these things, all of these symbols are so powerful that anyone, almost anywhere you go in the world, will know what they mean the moment that they see them. They will know that you or the people around you, or maybe even God herself, they will know that somebody thinks that you are just a step or two closer to heaven than everyone else around you. They'll say that you have been covered in glory. What they will not do, probably, is ask why it's a hat that does it. Why is it our heads that get crowned, that get tiara'd, that get haloed? Why isn't it our wrists? Those are as good a body part as our heads, right? Why isn't it a great cloak that we put on someone when we want to cover them in glory? Why does someone somewhere in the world not own pants of glory? No one knows for sure why hats became the thing to set people who are special apart from everyone else, but they suspect it might have something to do with what would happen if you were to climb a high mountain. The highest mountain you can find, one that's high enough that it gets you above the cloud layer. Climb a high mountain and stand with a low sun at your back and look down into the clouds below you. And if you do that, you will see your own shadow spread out across those clouds, and around your head you will see a perfect circle of a rainbow on your shadow. And no matter where you step, left or right, you will see that rainbow halo around you. Someone standing next to you will not see it around your head. They'll see it around their own head, but not around yours. And guess what this optical phenomenon is called? A glory. No one knows exactly why it happens. It's part of what's fun about this. Even the smartest physicists in the world can't quite explain it, though of course they know that it has something to do with the sun shining through the water droplets of the cloud and the light being refracted and bent back at you, and it comes back in such a way that it comes to the organs of your seeing, to your eyes, and so it looks to your eyes like it's only around your head, not around your body or your arms or your legs. It's only around your head, this glory. And they think that maybe that has something to do with why we decided that hats were the way to go. Because we were trying to mimic what people saw there in the clouds when they were high in the sky, as close to God as they could get when they had passed through the troubles of the darkness and emerged into the sun and saw themselves crowned with the light of the sun. And all those hats, the crowns and the tiaras and the laurel chaplets and everything else, are all attempts to mimic what you could see if you were standing on top of that mountain. All of them were derivative of that experience, just like all glory on earth, they say, is derivative of the glory of God. But that word glory, in that reading that Gracia just did, that long, convoluted prayer, glory comes up over and over, and you will not be blamed if you have no idea what that reading was about. We will not blame you if you tuned out halfway through because you could not follow it. Nobody could follow it. In fact, if you're the one in the room that could, you deserve a special hat. But for sure, one thing that it is about somehow is about glory. Jesus says over and over, Father, glorify me so that I can glorify you, and they can glorify me so that I can glorify you. Glory, glory, glory. But it doesn't say what exactly that means. We know that it has something to do with honor, with the praise and adulation of the people around you, to be sure. We know that it is in some sense a derivative, special characteristic that comes from the most glorious one of all, the one who created all this. And humans, at least humans that wrote our Bible, seem to think that what glory looks like is light, that it shines and glitters and glows. But Jesus said something interesting buried in the middle of that prayer there. I don't know if you caught it. If you were tuned out, you might not have. He said, glorify me with the glory that I had before the world was created. And when Jesus talks about the world, he's not talking about this planet. He doesn't have a very sophisticated understanding of the solar system and the universe. When he says before the world was created, he means before any of it was here, before creation itself existed. And if that's what he's talking about, the glory that he had back then, that God had back then, whatever it was, had nothing to do with light. God hadn't said, let there be light yet. In the biblical mind, at least, right? So whatever that glory is, it's not just a shining, it's not just a glittering, it's not a glowing, it's something else. And whatever it is, it happens in the dark. Which, if you think about it, is actually where God does most of God's best work. When God was brooding over the face of the waters like a mother hen there in the beginning before there was light, imagining the creation, humming it into being. When God was knitting Jesus together in the darkness of Mary's womb. They say that when Jesus was crucified that day, the sun went out. And we always assume that that means that the skies themselves were mourning in horror at what had happened. But what if that was just God closing God's eyes to gather her thoughts before the next great thing? God does God's best work in the dark, in the tomb there for those 3 days when God was pulling salvation out of murder and death, when the forces of law and order had destroyed God's self. There in the darkness of the tomb, God changed everything. And when God emerged, it was not into bright sunlight, it was into the darkness right before the dawn, still so dark that Mary couldn't recognize him standing there in front of her. And then when he appeared over and over to the disciples, he did it in an upper room or just at dawn or the middle of night. Glorify me so that I can glorify you, Jesus says. What if what he means isn't to give him a shining halo, to make him shine so bright like he did on a different mountain in a different story? What if it means to cover him in shadow? Because if Jesus is to be believed, what salvation looks like, where glory happens, is inside the tight closed fist of a widow with 2 bits to her name. Right before she opens it. If Jesus is to be believed, where God does God's work is in the shadow of a Samaritan falling over a man on the ground in front of him. If Jesus is to be believed, then where God does some of God's best work is in the dark. And even the glory that you can see if you climb that high mountain depends on shadow for it to work. You have to climb through the densest of clouds for this to work. You have to look down into the shadows with the light there too. The light is there too. But it's working with the shadows to bend what you see and give you a vision of loveliness that you could not imagine if you hadn't seen it yourself. So maybe we're going to do something to the heads of people who are special. Maybe if what we want to imagine when we imagine what the glory of God is like, we shouldn't imagine rhinestones and gems and precious metals. Maybe what we should imagine is the mourning veil. Maybe what we should imagine is the veil of tears of the brokenhearted that falls down their cheeks. Maybe the glory of God looks more like the matted hair of someone who has been trapped in their apartment by depression for weeks. Maybe it looks like a head bent over the divorce papers about to sign. If we're going to imagine what the glory of God looks like, if we're going to be glorified ourselves so that we can glorify God, maybe what we ought to imagine is something more like broken hearts and small acts of bravery. Maybe it shouldn't be trumpets blaring, but tears falling. Maybe it shouldn't be parades down the high street, but you alone in your prayer closet. Maybe it shouldn't be shining, at least not all the time. Maybe it should be the shadows.